It is December 14th, Monday, 9:31. I had to set up Facebook a little bit to get this rolling, and I still have the circle, like I'm not live, perhaps. So here we go, we're 3 seconds in. So, I have not talked about the COVID or SARS-CoV-2 vaccine probably since March, because I wanted to sit back and see what the rollout was going to look like. This is probably the fastest that a vaccine rollout has occurred, really. And so this class is not an anti-vax class at all, because we do have reports from Pfizer that their new vaccine that's pending emergency use clause or approval by the FDA is 95% effective. What I talked about in March was the fact that SARS-CoV-1, which I think was 2002, they started working on a messenger RNA vaccine after that outbreak. Wasn't quite this amount. So for SARS-CoV-2, we've got quite a bit more pandemic levels. But they've never come up with a messenger RNA vaccine for SARS-CoV-1. They've been working on it for about 17 years. So this is some information on an article I wrote I read from December 11th, so 3 days ago, by a physician at Yale University. He's also an epidemiologist. His name is Dr. F. Perry Wilson. He is not an anti-vax person. He's actually fairly excited about this vaccine. But he has some points of caution, and I think probably we need to pay attention to this. I think the first vaccine was given in the United Kingdom on Friday, and we'll see this rollout. There's a lot of vaccines in development. So the one you're hearing about is Pfizer's. Moderna has one. These are 2-shot vaccines, so you have to get the first shot and go back and get a second shot. Quite a few vaccines are like that for children. When I was vaccinated for hepatitis B as a healthcare professional, you had to have 3 injections over 6 months, I believe. It's been so long ago since I did it. It was in the early 90s, I think, when I got my hepatitis B vaccine. So I've had all of the vaccines that are recommended. I have my smallpox scar. It's just on my shoulder instead of my upper arm. So I've had most of them. What I haven't had, except once, is a flu vaccine. And the only reason I got the flu vaccine is because I was forced by my hospital. And sure enough, I got side effects. So efficacy rates of 95%, kind of amazing actually, because most of them are about 50. I mean, if you do the research, vaccination is maybe 50% effective. That's certainly true for the flu vaccine. So the 2018 flu vaccine, the strains that they put in it were actually not the strains that people had to worry about. So it was, I think, 20% effective. And then only 47% of people get a flu vaccine every year. So let's run through some information on this new Pfizer vaccine. Remember, Russia has one, China has one. Hey, the Heinzes are here. Shelley, Linda, Eileen's not a Heinz, but hi you all. So this is, Russia has a vaccine. They were first, I think. China has a vaccine. I saw a picture of 1 million doses in a crate. The Pfizer vaccine still, just getting ready to be rolled out nationwide. And I think there's 17 in development in phase 2. So Pfizer has, so China's is out, Russia's is out. The United Kingdom started using the vaccine. So this is the first one that's potentially emergency use approval by the FDA in the United States. So phase 3 trials have been completed, but there's a bunch in the pipeline. My cat just walked past me. Zooms and cats, I don't know what it is, or Facebook Lives and cats. I teach my students, and there's cats and kitties running around people's keyboards on their computer. It's pretty funny. Okay, so this is from Dr. F. Perry Wilson at Yale University. So think of the achievement. So within a month of the emergence of the SARS-CoV-2, or COVID-19 as it's familiarly known, the genome of that virus was sequenced, so within a month. And then 3 months later, you get the first vaccine candidates being injected as human volunteers in phase 2 clinical trials. And now here we are less than 12 months after the virus was identified in Wuhan, China. And right now, the United States, less than 12 months later, is going to initiate the largest mass vaccination program in the history of the country. Okay, so this, there's not that many achievements in medicine that happen that fast. And there's I've been in the clinical health and health industry since 1986, and this is probably the fastest thing I've seen. And this guy actually calls it audacity. So few achievements in modern science rival the speed and the audacity of the coronavirus vaccine program. And remember, he is a vaccine positive person. Okay? So the idea is that the long, dark realm of the pandemic. So we had 283,000 American lives lost, 1.5 million lost worldwide. Hopefully will be relegated to the annals of history in medical history. So hopefully the COVID-19 will be a thing of the past. Maybe. Okay. So it's a 95% efficacy rate of the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna messenger RNA vaccine. So it's unprecedented. Like I told you, the SARS-CoV-1 they've been working on 17 years. They haven't come up with one. But so this sounds exciting, but he has a cautionary tale. So tempering our enthusiasm with the acknowledgement that the vaccine is a weapon that we may not be fully prepared to wield. Okay? So a lot can go wrong, is his point. So the worries are there. It's not to put down the fact that we now have a 95% efficacious vaccine. And so you have to think, he calls himself a worrier. So he says, I worry to ensure the things that I worry about don't actually happen. And so we all need to kind of step back and think, okay, before we rush headlong into doing all this, and all of us getting vaccinated with a 95% efficacy vaccine, what's the potential downfall? What could happen? So he lists these from probabilities of low to high. And you can probably guess what the highest one is. So number one, which he considers a low probability, is long-term side effects. Okay, I have a friend of mine in Florida that sent me a video of a man who had gotten a Tdap booster, so tetanus diphtheria booster. So it used to be DPT, DPT, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. He had gotten a booster, and it ruined his life. I mean, like within a week, this guy was writhing, having seizures, and chronic pain, this, and that, and the other thing. His wife was pleading for, pay attention to vaccine side effects, and this, and that, and the other thing. So there are some reports of some serious side effects that can be long-term. And this is a brand new vaccine. We don't know. How are we going to know? So messenger RNA vaccines have never been used in a broad-scale vaccination effort ever in the history of the world. So the fact that it's a messenger RNA vaccine, so they've never come up with a messenger RNA coronavirus vaccine before. The messenger RNA molecule is fairly unstable, so it needs to be transported in super cold conditions. That's the Pfizer thing. It has to be put on dry ice. so it can easily break down. Has no ability to integrate into your DNA system, so it's not like you're going to turn into a mutant zombie if you get a COVID-19 vaccine. There is some caution and concern about the possibility to an immune reaction to the RNA leading to autoimmune disease. So think of systemic lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, all that. But the testing has not shown that. But keep in mind, we only knew about this little viral thing 12 months ago. So we don't really know. Is there a possibility that there could be an immune reaction? Like I said, it's not going to integrate into your DNA. The whole point of taking zinc and getting into your cell with quercetin or fish oil is for the zinc to break down the replication of this virus through its RNA, messenger RNA mode of attack. Okay. So number two, what if there's not enough vaccine? So he considers this probability fairly low. So if you think about the vaccine as the medicine or the sera or however they, and I didn't look up all the science behind this vaccine, that's in a vial and eventually winds up in your arm. One of the nice things that messenger RNA vaccines are pretty easy to scale up. So there are messenger RNA vaccines that have been produced, and he says you can make 1 million doses in a bioreactor the size of a Coke bottle. So ramping up the production is doable. Okay, but then he says we don't have to depend on the messenger RNA vaccines alone. So AstraZeneca's vaccine had some setbacks, but still likely to join the fight sometime in the next few months. So Australia stopped vaccinating with AstraZeneca's vaccine, and then there's a Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is a one-dose regimen. We talk about 2 doses. Johnson & Johnson is working on a one-dose regimen for COVID-19. So there's a lot in the pipeline. So 13 vaccines in phase 3 trials, and that doesn't include the 2 that you've, not including the Pfizer vaccine. There's 17 vaccines in phase 2, and there's a whole bunch of them that are in phase 1. Okay, many of them target the spike protein of the coronavirus, which is kind of the same target that the Pfizer vaccine and the early vaccines have led to high efficacy rates. And so if those trials can recruit enough volunteers, then you should see increased availability of different types of vaccine. Okay? So the problem is, if you're worried about getting coronavirus and you volunteer to be in a COVID-19 vaccine trial and it's placebo controlled, half of you are going to get a placebo and you're not going to get the vaccine. So will people continue to volunteer when an effective vaccine is on the market? Okay, so even though you've got, what is that, 1730, then 1713, that's 20. So that's 20 in phase 2 and phase 3. You've got a couple that are potentially are going to be used. How many volunteers are going to volunteer for a 50% chance of getting a placebo? Okay. Number 3, the vaccination becomes politicized. Okay, the possibility of that, he thinks, is low. And depending on your political aspirations, etc., there are people that are vaccine skeptics. Is that political, or is that, it's hard to say. So there's all kinds of theories out there, conspiracy theories, chips being implanted in you, etc., etc. But there is a low social trust for some people based on their political affiliation. Number 4, there may not be enough vaccine supplies. The possibility of this is moderate because you have to be able to distribute the vaccine into someone's arm. So you get a vial. So you say you get a vial. Okay, we got a vial of vaccine. What are you going to do with it? Okay, so you have to have alcohol swabs. You have to have needles, you have to have syringes, etc. Well, that's not provided by a vaccine company or a pharmaceutical company. It's provided by other companies that provide medical supplies. Um, so they need to be sourced from other companies. Okay, we don't have a Defense Production Act order for increasing the supply of the critical components of a huge vaccination program. So we may face the possibility that we have plenty of vaccine, but not enough needles to get them into enough arms, okay, which would slow the vaccine rollout and potentially prolong the pandemic, even though you got an approved vaccine. Okay, number 5, people won't get both doses. That's about moderate. So you've got, multi-dose vaccines. They're nothing new. The MMR vaccine, rotavirus, tetanus are all multi-dose. Hepatitis B is multi-dose. They're routine childhood vaccines, maybe not hepatitis B, but the childhood vaccinations typically are done because parents take their children in to have their vaccinations, and without without a physician's order saying, your child doesn't have to have a vaccine. They have to prove their vaccination to be able to go to school. Okay, and then parallels to seasonal flu vaccine aren't helping either. So getting a yearly flu shot is pretty easy. It's one shot. It's reasonably inexpensive. You can pay for it at pretty much any pharmacy, Walmart, whatever, for $25. And if you have Medicare, they'll bill your Medicare. And so we're not really that good at getting seasonal flu vaccines. People over 65 tend to be a little bit better at it. So it's 45% going back to 2018-19 flu season. So how many people are going to remember to go back to get the booster COVID-19 vaccine shot? So if Johnson & Johnson comes out with a one-shot deal, you're done. But if it's, if the vaccination protocol is 2 injections, potentially 3 weeks to 4 weeks later, there are people that may feel protected when they aren't. So in other words, they have one shot and think they're protected, and then forget to get the second one or decide they don't want to do it. And then several virologists have suggested that may lead to a vaccine resistance, which is kind of what viruses do. They change themselves, they get attacked by something, they change themselves to be able to continue to survive and thrive. Okay, so a partially vaccinated person may get a low-grade COVID-19 infection, and selection pressures within that person will favor viruses that can evade a vaccine-induced immune response. So it's possible that people who've only had one shot of the vaccine can become infected, and that result in an escape mutant of this virus. It's hypothetical. That's not been seen yet, but it's a possibility, right? So getting a second shot, or the ability to remind people, oh, get your second shot, or set up an appointment to get their second shot, whatever, that's a potential downfall. Number 6, doctors may bend the truth to get their patients a vaccine faster. That's possible. Okay, so until it's a rollout for every person to get a vaccine, there's some guidance from the CDC focusing on healthcare workers and residents of long-term facilities to get the first phase of vaccination during this rollout. And so phase 2 could be a problem. Okay, it's possible, actually likely, that the vaccine will be reserved for people with pre-existing condition like older age, over 60, diabetes, maybe obesity, COPD people, people with chronic lung disease. And so if you go to Gerb's, Kroger, CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, how are they going to know if you've got that? So in other words, your doctor would have to say, well, this person has these comorbidities and they deserve to get this vaccine. So there may be some incentives for doctors to think, well, maybe I need to come up with a code, or I need to come up with a comorbidity, because I'm going to vouch and advocate for my patients, and hopefully they will get the vaccine because of those comorbidities. So do you recheck blood pressures? Do you check obesity on the medical record, even though somebody's not technically obese based on diagnostic criteria? Um, and he points out that there's a lot of doctors that give out antibiotics for no rational reason. So he's saying 30%, there's a large study showing that 30% of antibiotics are not um, effective in what the patient is being seen for. So doctors, this goes back to the pharmaceutical incentives and payment incentives and stuff that I did about 3 weeks ago. So you want to keep patients happy, especially the Medicare age ones, because they can rank you. They can get, patient satisfaction scores, and if they're not happy, they're not going to give you a good patient satisfaction score, and that can alter payments to hospitals and physicians. So it's not always right to keep somebody happy. There are many times where doctors basically need to tell their patients something they don't want to hear, because it's just not it's not the correct interaction or intervention. Okay, so there is potentially an incentive for physicians to upcode people and upgrade their diagnostics or their conditions to a higher risk higher risk individual, and that may alter the allocation of vaccine resources to those people who would do okay without a vaccine. Okay, so the rollout is going on. I told you that you can manufacture a significant amount of doses, but they're going to be allocated, at least at first. Okay, number 7, vaccines may exacerbate inequality in the healthcare system. So there's 80 million people in the United States that don't have access to a doctor's care at any given time. And a lot of those have comorbidities, like we talked about number 6, that they haven't been documented. So there's no way for them to prove that they have the comorbidity because they haven't seen a doctor. Okay? And a lot of these people are lower socioeconomic status people. And that group of people, they've shown a socioeconomic risk factor for COVID-19 infection. So the people that would potentially benefit the most from a vaccine, those 80 million, don't have access to a doctor to say they have a comorbidity that says that they would benefit from the vaccine. And so they might get left in the dust. Okay, so to prevent that, you have to target vaccination programs in low-income and undersourced communities, and maybe waive comorbidity restrictions among those that don't have access to quality health care. Okay? And then number 8, a false sense of security developing in people. Probability of that, he thinks, is high. So you have an efficacy reported 95%. And so if you get a vaccine and you kind of loosen it up and you do whatever you want to do after you get vaccinated, there should be a decline in infections, but remember, it's 95%. So what about the 5%? Okay, so everybody that gets a vaccine is going to think they're in the 95%, but 5% of them are not going to be. So 5 out of every 100 people are not going to be theoretically protected for COVID-19. Okay, so if the recommended behaviors that everybody's arguing about are not followed by those 5% who get vaccinated who are really not immune to this infection, they may still suffer the consequences of COVID-19 infection, potentially spread that to the other 5% that were vaccinated and still are not protected. Okay, and then his last one is number 9, anti-vaxxers amplify and misrepresent side effects. He calls this almost certain, and he says it's already happening. I could not get to the article that he referenced without a payment thing. Sometimes you put stuff up, and if you're not a subscriber, you can't get to it. So the real worry is how much it will affect the broad-scale vaccination effort. So theoretically, you would get about 70% of the population vaccinated, or people that were COVID-19 infected. So ethically, just letting somebody get infected and to see if they live and form an immune response. Ethically, you wouldn't do that. That's herd immunity to end this pandemic. So it's kind of a high bar setting, having 70% of people actually get vaccinated or infected. Okay, and this is where the microchip tracking device conspiracy theories come in and all that. So he references a story from a vaccine expert at the University of Pennsylvania, who has also sat on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee. And the story is that this physician was about to vaccinate a child with their first MMR vaccine, which is pretty routine, and 5 minutes before the vaccine was given, the child had a seizure. First seizure this child ever had. And his question was, can you imagine what would have happened if that seizure occurred 5 minutes after he gave the vaccine? Okay? So we're basically getting ready to roll out a vaccination of hundreds of millions of people. There are going to be people that have seizures, they're going to have side effects, they're going to have things that would have happened anyway, whether they were vaccinated or not. Somebody's going to have a heart attack, somebody's going to have a car accident, somebody will commit suicide, whatever. And so you're going to have stories coming out about, well, this person got vaccinated and committed suicide. This person got vaccinated and got this, had this, whatever. Congestive heart failure. So that's anecdotal evidence. So far, we don't have any scientific evidence of that or side effects, long-term side effects, and it'll take a while to figure that out. But you're going to hear stories. Okay, you're going to hear stories of people who get vaccines. There's the story of people in, I think it was Australia getting vaccinated to COVID-19, and they have a higher risk of HIV infection. Turns out that's a false positive HIV titer, but is it related to the COVID-19 vaccine? I don't know which vaccine that is, but it's out there. I saw a case report of 4 people that got Bell's palsy, so facial nerve palsy, after their voluntary experience with receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. That's anecdotal. You have to study it scientifically to see if it's true, but those stories are coming, and they'll be all over Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it. They're going to be over there. So, are there any other things to worry about? He says absolutely. So there are things that may completely destroy this vaccination effort that we haven't even thought of yet, or that he hasn't even thought of. So the idea is to be flexible, make up your own mind about vaccination. I will tell you, I haven't made up my own mind. I don't take the flu vaccine. I still haven't done it, except that 1 year. And I was forced, which I also didn't like. But you have to research, read, decide what's good for you. Hopefully there's not a mandate. I mean, if you are told you cannot do this and you cannot do that unless you can show proof that you were vaccinated to COVID-19, there's a slippery slope. So that's what I know. I thought I would, that's what I read. I thought I would share that with you so that even if you're optimistic, there are things to think of or think about and pay attention to. So we're under 30 minutes. It is cold in central Missouri. I guess there's a bunch of snow in Branson. We got nothing here in Boonville. But I'm going to sit next to my heater and stay home. The high school has gone virtual, so I won't be substitute teaching. My students are taking their final exams by tomorrow night at midnight. So I will be done teaching, except to you all, for the next month or so. I'll see you, what's this, Monday? I'll see you all Wednesday, and we'll come up with something else fun to talk about. All right, see you later. Bye.